You're listening to the No Bullshit Vegan Podcast, episode 222. Paul Erlandson from Rivendell Farmed Animal Sanctuary is here to discuss veganism as a practice rather than an identity, and the role of sanctuaries in promoting compassion toward animals.
Welcome to the No Bullshit Vegan Podcast, myth-busting and evidence-based advice to help you kick butt with your health and fitness on a vegan diet. Here's your host, Karina Inkster.
Hey, welcome to the show. I'm Karina, your go-to no BS vegan fitness and nutrition coach. Thanks for tuning in. I had someone message me today via the chat box on my website, which, by the way, goes directly to me, a real human with a keyboard, not a chatbot, asking whether our client check-ins within our coaching programs are with actual people or with AI or an app. So let me clear this up. Nothing we do in our coaching is generated by AI. Your workouts are handcrafted by real humans with strong opinions about your deadlift form, your protein intake, and whether you're actually doing your program or just thinking about it really hard. But more importantly, you're getting human attention on your actual life, your goals, your schedule, your travel plans, your chaos at work weeks, real accountability, real adjustments, real feedback that evolves as you do. So if you'd like that level of human attention in your life, head to karinainkster.com/coaching. That's karinainkster.com/coaching. Introducing my guest today, Paul Erlandson. He's a musician and audio technologist turned owner of a farmed animal sanctuary. Paul started Rivendell Sanctuary with his wife, Kelly, in 2023. Rivendell is the forever home to animals in need and focuses on species that are exploited from our industrial food system. Rivendell hosts Friends Table vegan community events, as well as meditation retreats. Paul has practiced Soto Zen for 30 years and is in the process of becoming a certified meditation and mindfulness instructor. He's been vegan for 4 years. Rivendell is also centered in sustainability, using renewable energy, rainwater and gray water capture, permaculture farming techniques, and habitat preservation. Paul's favorite meal is lentil curry from Rainbow Plant Life, which is an amazing resource if you haven't checked out Nisha's website, rainbowplantlife.com. I use her braised tofu recipe on a regular basis, and it's amazing. Here's my conversation with Paul. Paul, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for speaking with me today.
Thank you, Karina. It's really a pleasure. I'm very happy to be here with you today.
I have to give our client Maureen a shout out. She's the one who connected me with you. I think she came to your sanctuary, but shout out to Maureen for connecting us, and I'm looking forward to our discussion.
Me as well. Yeah. Thank you, Maureen.
Yes. Okay. So let's jump right in. I want to hear about your sanctuary that you and your wife started not even that long ago. I think it was 2023. So tell me about that, how it started, and what you guys do.
Our origin story had something to do with COVID. You know, like so many people, my wife, Kelly, and I had been talking about doing a sanctuary for quite a long time. And you know how COVID made a lot of people sort of confront, what am I really going to do with my life? You know, it was really a, for lack of a better term, a come to Jesus moment for a lot of people as to, you know, what we're really doing here. And in fact, I don't know if you recall, I had done a video series called X-Pandemic at the beginning of COVID. And I remember there was this real optimism of people thinking like, we're not going to do jobs that don't matter to us anymore. We've all seen the light. We've been stuck in house and we're all going to do meaningful work, you know. But in our case, we actually kind of proceeded forward with it. One path would have been to be completely nomadic and kind of do a van life thing. And then this was the exact polar opposite.
Yes. You're location dependent now.
Very much. And it's very hard to leave. But that's the one that won out. And we had just talked about it for years. My wife did have, it wasn't an official rescue, but she had a very touching story of going with a friend of hers to one of those livestock auctions and seeing some horses that were destined to be sent probably for glue. They had various different physical problems and just didn't likely have a good outcome. And she literally rescued 3 of them without having anywhere really to put them.
Oh my goodness.
Had a day to build a structure and then bring them in. And then that was followed by goats and some other things. So she had a little bit of experience with this. I had far less, but I was thinking the other day how when I was about 14 years old, two things happened. One is that I got my first band, and the other was that I saw this film about how veal calves were raised. So it started simultaneously, this sort of direction towards music and towards animal welfare. And music won for most of my life. So in a way, it felt like sort of returning to this impulse that had been within me for a long time. So, we looked for land, and we looked at some different areas, and where we settled is just this really unique part of Southern California. We didn't even know it existed. It's hard to believe it does exist because it's so bizarro for Southern California, but it's an area outside of Temecula called Duluth, and it's these sort of rolling oak forests with creeks, and they require 5 acres or more for each parcel. So there's no sprawl. There's really bad cell service. So a lot of people just won't come here for that reason. But it really is beautiful. And we stumbled on this land kind of by accident. We were just sort of driving around. We saw, for sale. All it said was no HOA. And we're like, well, that's, that's helpful. So we pulled into it, and it has this amazing creek. It just felt like another world. It's this oak forest. It's a really intact riparian zone. And at the top, there was a pad, which ended up being perfect for the house, and another pad that could be like an ADU or something. And so, it was outside of our price range, but we just, once we saw it, we really couldn't settle on anything else. So we had to muster, and we wrote a letter to the person selling it saying, look, we want to start an animal sanctuary. What do you think? And I'd like to say he immediately dropped thousands of dollars, but our argument wasn't all the way. Huh? No such luck. Yeah, I was like, yeah, whatever. Good luck to you. But that all worked out. So we spent a year just coming here on weekends, every weekend, and clearing brush. I mean, it was just weeds, right? There was just no infrastructure other than water. And, just putting up fences and getting prepared. And then the second year, they were going to bring the house to us. We got a manufactured home, and we lived on site in a trailer for a year. And then at the end of that year is when we got the occupancy green light for the house. And almost immediately, we got word from someone in this area that they had 2 guinea hogs that they had to move to Texas, and they were looking for homes for them. And so at first we just tried to help them. We connected them with Farm Sanctuary and some other sanctuaries that we knew, and no luck. And then finally the owner of them said, well, you know what, we're just going to take them to Texas with us. And so we're like, okay, well, at least there was resolution there. About a week later, he said, you know what, it's not working. There's no way we can get transport that's going to work. So we've hired someone to come put them down on Friday. And this was on Monday.
Wow.
And we had just gotten the green light to occupy the house. So we didn't have any pins or anything. So me and my wife and my mother-in-law just huddled and said, look, we can't let this stand. So we threw a pin together and made arrangements to pick them up. These hogs had never left the house. They were at the same place from the time they were tiny little piglets. And now Ethel was 400 pounds, Lucy was 350 pounds, and they had never been in a truck or anything. So we had to arrange all that stuff. We brought them in, and that was apart from some chickens, that was our first rescue. And it's just been all speed ahead ever since then. So, and the thing about this that we've tried to make a little bit different is that it's not going to be a massive sanctuary because it's quite hilly here. Mm-hmm. So the opportunities for flat land are a little bit sparse, and some species do fine on some slopes and some don't. Our niche, I think, is to have this be a place that is modeled less after a farm, like many sanctuaries are, and a little bit more closely to maybe a retreat center or something that's a place that you would go to for other types of events, and the animals are just part of what's there and part of the environment, and a place where you would just sort of like to go and hang out. We have trails and things like that I've carved. So I think it's a little bit different from the other sanctuaries we've been to. So that's kind of the concept behind it.
Wow, that's really cool. I think a lot of times we hear about someone's end result. Like I started X, I bought Y, I created Z, whatever it is. But you don't really hear, unless you talk with that person, about the journey and how long it took and the roadblocks and the challenges. So this is a multi-year process for you guys, putting this together, getting ready, acquiring land, all the things. What I'm interested in is where veganism fits into this, because it seems like it's kind of along the same timeline, because you've been vegan for 4 years, I think. Isn't that during all of this prep?
Yeah, it is. They were simultaneous. Which is very unusual, right? I mean, it's usually you would be vegan for years, but before you had such a sort of wild idea that I'm going to create an animal sanctuary, right? Like it in so many people's journeys, this is the final expression of their veganism, right? And with me, it was sort of a concurrent thing. But that's not all the way accurate, in that if you buy the idea that many of us come here in stages, there definitely was a lot of stages involved. So I had been vegetarian for years. I fell off that wagon for a bit when I first got together with Kelly. Then we both kind of were just on a process of scaling that back. So I was a pescatarian for probably 2 or 3 years, and I didn't do any liquid dairy, but I was a massive and irredeemable cheese addict. So it was really through the process of Sanctuary and the research and everything, and you get acquainted with other sanctuaries and you get acquainted with these resources that are designed to help people start sanctuaries and do it in a very ethical way. And you just can't escape that all of it's a mess. All of it has to go. And so it was really, that pre-vegan step was letting go of fish and cheese and eggs.
Right. But
I was a reductitarian, or whatever you want to say, for many years prior to that. And for ethical reasons, it was just an imperfected impulse.
That's super interesting. Like you said, I don't think it's very common to have those things be concurrent. I actually know a number of folks who were vegan for years and years and then opened a sanctuary at some later point. So that's super interesting.
Yeah.
And it's always cool to see how different folks come to veganism. Everyone has their own story. Everyone has their own journey, but we're all here for similar reasons. And we as ethical vegans don't really care what brings people to it, as long as they get to it at some point. So it's always really interesting to hear people's stories. I appreciate that.
Yeah, I know a lot of people where it's just they saw a film or they encountered some information and that was it. They got rid of all of it all at once. And for me, it took decades. I mean, I didn't eat red meat from the time I was 14. I would justify it to myself as, well, the louder something screams, the less desirable it is to eat. So I had a hierarchy, and poultry and fish were sort of lower on that scale. But what cures you of that is getting to know chickens. That, and also realizing that, so, I mean, when I was pescatarian, if you lean into fish as your protein source, like instead of choosing chickpeas and, legumes and so forth and soy as your focus in terms of protein. And I've always been very conscious of the mix of, protein and complex carbohydrates and things like that, just for my own health and well-being. What happens is you eat a ton of it. And so not only the ethical outcomes, but the environmental impacts of eating so much fish are just horrifying. So
good point.
There really just comes a point where you really got to toss all of it out, because if you hang on to one thing, you're going to lean so heavily into that one thing that all the negative impacts are going to just be magnified.
That's a good way of putting it. It's a crutch that becomes kind of overbearing, like if that's the only source of protein. My colleague, Coach Zoe, in our business, she always says, for whatever reason, omnivores have like 4, maybe 5 protein sources that they rotate. Vegans have like 35.
Yeah, right. That's exactly right.
Hey, about chickens, though, I want to know about the egg thing. So a lot of folks will immediately say, oh, well, you have rescue chickens. They're taking fabulous care. All of their needs are met. What happens to their eggs?
Yeah. So the main thing that happens to them is we feed them back to the chickens. We feed them to our dogs. It is one of those areas that I think it is a little bit complex, isn't it? Because If your motivation for veganism is to avoid suffering of animals, to not participate in the exploitation and suffering of animals, rescued chickens laying eggs don't really fit that paradigm. So I feel like ethically that is a bit different. And I haven't heard a convincing argument why that wouldn't be. There is a couple, though. One is that, and this is kind of a personal thing, if you start eating the eggs and then it becomes part of your protein profile, like we just talked about, then the pressure for you to do it outside of that realm grows. The other argument for it is the appearance of it. So it feels like it's a condoning of it. And that is quite a nuanced, difficult thing to communicate, that it's not the eggs, it's the treatment of the birds that are laying the eggs. So that is a little bit tricky, and that's something I am kind of grappling with. But it feels different, doesn't it? I mean, rescued chickens that are laying eggs and are treated gloriously well and are going to be kept for the remainder of their life. There's not some point at which their production factors into their value. Right? There's not some point at which you're going to cull them because they're no longer laying. That's not part of the equation at all.
Yeah. It's kind of a gray area, isn't it? Because I know people here, I live in a fairly rural area. There's folks here who have chickens specifically for meat and eggs. And that's a completely different scenario, because now we're looking at commodification. We're looking at culling chickens when they no longer lay, when their production decreases. So that's a whole scenario that obviously I'm not into. I don't eat eggs at all, regardless of where or how the chickens have been kept. Yeah. But it's like a less worse option. You know, I think there's still some level of commodification, you know, to your point of the aesthetics of things. You know, you're condoning eating animal products to some extent. You are still seeing that animal as a commodity, something that is providing something of value to you as a human. And I think a lot of ethical vegans are not on that page at all. But look, if someone is gonna eat eggs regardless, that's a less worse scenario.
If you look at it in terms of tiers, the biggest sources of exploitation and cruelty are tied to the profit motive. There is a position one could articulate that the problem is not using the products of animals as much as turning the animals into a product.
Exactly.
When you turn them into a product, all of the price pressure is going to be smaller pens, shorter lifespan, like all of that turns into money. And you're entering a marketplace where you're competing with people who are not going to let the chickens live a long time. They're not going to give them a lot of space. They're not going to like put them on their lap and pet them and so forth. So there's no real practical way this method could provide eggs for people to eat.
Right.
Once you sell them, it's all over. It's game over. There's just no way around it. So there is some complexity to that. There's also, I mentioned in that article I wrote for DVA about a monk that I met who said growing up in Sri Lanka, they had a cow that they would milk, and the cow birthed calves, and the calves stayed with the mom, and they would nurse off of the cow, and then they would milk some, and then the calf would have some. And you know, you could see there's potential for abuse with that. You can make it where the calf is kind of starving because you're getting greedy for the milk. But in this case, with their family cow, that's not how they treated it. And they kept it for its entire life. And when it died of natural causes, they buried it. It was like a member of the family. It's hard to argue that that's not a terrible life for a cow. That cow probably had a pretty darn good life in the grand scheme of things. But there's no way you can do that and sell that milk in Safeway. Like, it doesn't work that way at all. So, yeah. So it's almost like a hypothetical situation in that case.
Exactly.
Also, I mean, imagine what that milk would cost you by having a cow.
That's
and
a good
water
point.
And everything. You know, it's totally impractical. It would be, you know, hundreds of dollars per gallon. Just no one would do that. So.
Yeah, it's completely unscalable. It's the same with things like grass-fed beef, you know, pasture-raised, etc. It's not scalable. Even if every human decreased their meat consumption by, you know, some mass amount, it's still not feasible. So it's kind of the same concept economically. Hey, so I'm interested in this article that you just mentioned. So can you tell me a little bit about that?
The genesis of the article was, I've practiced a form of Soto Zen Buddhism for almost 30 years now. The monastery where I first trained at has always been vegetarian. And I'm very grateful to them for the grounding and the practice that they gave me. The monks there are just extraordinarily kind and have this characteristic of very interested in what's going on with you, but not tied to the outcome. Mm-hmm. That's such an unusual kind of role for someone to have towards you that immediately I was like, well, that's different. Because usually when someone's really invested in it, they want it to end a certain way. And they're just like, no, I'm all the way with you, but I don't know how it's going to end. It was so unusual. So anyhow, that's what kind of drew me to that practice. So I returned after probably 15 years because it's at the top of California. I'm at the bottom. Life has been insane. I've, raised kids and moved from Humboldt County to Southern California, and it just never really was in the cards. So I finally determined I'm going to go back, took some vacation time and went to a 3-day silent retreat, which was just a lot of sitting, staring at a wall. So in this practice, they are vegetarian, but they do consume dairy and eggs. And it is sort of that thing when you kind of lean into that as a source of protein, you lean hard into it because, it's that same thing we just talked about. So now in the kitchen, when you're on retreat there, everyone helps in the kitchen to prepare the food. And it's really quite beautiful how they prepare the food because they're kind of dependent on donation. So it's like, okay, well, we got celery, we got broccoli, we got tofu. What do we make? And there's one monk who's in charge of the kitchen and they take turns doing that job. It's designed to be an expression of your practice and your mindfulness, that you're very conscious to make sure the food's nutritious and it's well prepared and tastes good. But so the question was asked by the head monk there, are there any dietary restrictions? And I said, well, I don't eat eggs and dairy. His response was, well, I meant like medical restrictions, not like a lifestyle preference, which, is, we're vegans. That's far from one of the most sort of offensive things we hear all the time, right?
Good point.
That was all in all fairly gentle, but it just, 3 days of meditation with this thing ringing in my ears just made me really kind of sit with that lifestyle preference. One of the things that came up is there probably are those for whom it's kind of a lifestyle preference. But for me, it has so much more kind of ethical immediacy. It's not like, I prefer blue food to yellow food or something, it's a whole different category. So anyhow, so I wrote this article. I was just sort of like simmering along with some of the ideas within it. And I used the frame of it was the mealtime verse that they say at the monastery, which is, we must think deeply of the ways and means by which this food has come. We must consider our merit when accepting it. We must protect ourselves from error by excluding greed from our minds. We will eat lest we become lean and die. We accept this food so that we may become enlightened. And so I just took each line of that. And the first one was, we must think deeply of the ways and means by which this food has come. And that's basically where I explore what happens when we raise animals for dairy and for eggs. Mm-hmm. Just the kind of disconnect between the way they're preparing food in the kitchen is being conscious of the well-being of the worms that are getting the leftovers. There's just this consciousness of the effect you're having on others, which is reflected in the abstinence from meat. And it just felt like to not take a look at what that means in terms of dairy and eggs, it really struck me. So the article is basically my attempt to, explore that through a couple of different prisms. And one was just sort of with some facts about how this goes, when you buy dairy, for near certainty, it came from a cow that was artificially inseminated, gave birth to 3 calves. Those calves were taken away the day they were born. The mother cow is milked by a machine 3 times a day, 2 or 3 times a day. And at a quarter of her natural lifespan was killed for low-grade meat. Whether it's like a small farm or a giant 20,000 cow industrial situation, that's basically how it goes. That's just so hard to reconcile with a practice that's really concerned with the well-being of other animals and beings. So that, and then I gave the example of we must protect ourselves from error by excluding greed from our minds. There was a period there as a pescatarian where I knew that dairy was really bad news. And I knew that it created a lot of suffering. And I was having trouble letting go of cheese. And someone told me, well, goat cheese isn't like that. Goats will produce milk without needing their babies taken away. I was all, oh, okay, well, that's certainly more humane. So I shifted over to goat cheese and sheep cheese. And and then, of course, you know how this is going to end. It's not true at all that that's the way it is. So, but my point is that I could have figured that out in 10 minutes, with a Google search, and I didn't. And the reason I didn't is I really wanted to keep eating cheese. And that's just a form of greed. It's a clinging to this sort of desire. I mean, on a good day, we can extend some version of that to people that will not look at what is involved with factory farming because they desire meat so much. And you have to do this kind of convoluted mental construction to make it okay when there's a little voice inside of you that's saying, that's really probably not okay. So I looked at that part of it. And then the end part kind of explores the idea, which is something I've been thinking about a lot. And that is just that there is one way to approach veganism that's less of an identity and more of a practice. And when you view it that way, some things change about it. So one thing that comes up for me that's different is that, if this is a practice where a human being expresses compassion for all living things through their choices, we don't just wish this as our own personal preference. We all really wish that society would change to being more compassionate towards animals and so forth. But we also know how uncomfortable it is to be with friends and family, and often, people that are just lovely, wonderful, kind people who practice this. I have family members that have given their whole lives to helping the unfortunate, the unhoused. You can't argue this is someone that doesn't care about anyone else, Part of the practice for me, there's a few aspects to it. One of the parts of practice is that the willingness to sit with the discomfort of being the person at the table that says, I'm not going to eat that. Because I know there is a pull in some vegan circles that we're not going to sit at that table. Mm-hmm. We're not going to participate in that. And so for me, I frame it as we do well to create a kind of helpful discomfort. When you see someone who's vegan, who is kind and rational and healthy, it's uncomfortable to the narrative of people that swear that's not possible.
Yes. We still have things to prove, unfortunately, but absolutely. Yes, I agree.
Right. I'm primarily a fairly private person. I don't like to call attention to myself. I'm the youngest of 7. I survived in my family by being easygoing. Like I was just low maintenance, It is outside of my comfort zone to be the one that says, like at work events that we have to find a place that has something for me, and it calls attention to myself that I'm not real comfortable with. But I frame it as like, this is part of my practice. Like with the sort of physical work that you do, the fitness work, you don't always feel like going in there and lifting weights, right? Sometimes it's just, I'd rather hang out and watch Netflix.
I'd rather sit on the couch with my cats. Absolutely.
Exactly. But you do it because it's important to you and it's a practice. So I frame it that way. And then the other part of it for me is that I feel compelled to make absolutely badass, tasty vegan food for people so that when I serve them something, they're like, oh, damn, that's really good. You swear there's nothing? Nope, not a thing. That also is part of the practice. Another area where you can create a little bit of discomfort. Like,
oh, I love that. It's one of my favorite things to do, honestly. Usually it's some absolutely unhinged dessert of some kind, some ridiculous chocolate cake or 5 different kinds of cookies or whatever. And, people who know me will just assume that it's vegan at this point. But if it's for new people, I get exactly the same kind of questions. Wait, what? There's no butter in here? What? Huh? Like they're confused.
Yeah.
It's very helpful actually at starting conversations.
Yeah. Yeah. And I've had people that just say that, gosh, I didn't think I could do it, but we have volunteers that live with us for a week and not all of them are vegan, but sometimes after a week, they're like, oh yeah, I could do this. Like everything you're eating is like killer, it's all really good. So it's just one hurdle to potentially get over. So
That's cool. I want to go back to the identity thing for 1 second. I just had a random thought. So the veganism as a practice versus an identity, although I'm sure it can be a little bit of both. There's this whole concept in habit building and behavior change, whether that's for fitness or work or whatever. In books like Atomic Habits by James Clear, for example, one of my TEDx speaker cohorts did her whole talk on this, habit change as identity change. So it's this idea that if we do want to build new habits, if we want to learn a skill, if we want to start strength training, if we want to become vegan, then having that identity versus doing the action actually leads to more long-term behavior change. So my speaker colleague's example was, she's learning to play golf. She doesn't say, I'm learning to play golf. She says, I'm a golfer. And that keeps her consistent. She goes to the driving range, she goes and practices, she plays games. And she's been way more consistent than if she said, yeah, I golf occasionally. How do those kind of fit together? Is there a little bit of identity still that's useful, especially if we're talking about someone who's just coming to veganism? How do those habit change concepts factor in with veganism as a practice?
Yeah, I think what you just described is a good synopsis of identity as a tool, as something that you can use. But there's a sort of wider framing of this that is basically just part of my spiritual practice, because I would also not say that I'm a Buddhist. I would say I practice Buddhism. To me, you're always exchanging something for that identity. There's something fixed. There's something that can become fossilized within a person for that. There can also be this enormous disruption when you grow and you change. And I know none of us like to think that, well, veganism isn't something I intend to grow out of. But I think from a slightly wider view, identity always presents to us a kind of a jail, because you can look at it in every domain of your life. I'm married. How helpful is it for me to have the identity of a husband or a father versus the practice? Like every day getting up and saying, today I'm being a husband. Today I am being a father. There's something that's both more dynamic to me and points towards a kind of liberation. It can get pretty metaphysical pretty quick, but the idea that you are more process than thing, it kind of fits in really nicely with that. As a process, veganism is a way I'm sort of living in the world and being in the world. And, so for me, it's also like every time you sit down to eat, you're saying, yeah, it's important to me that I care for other beings on this planet. So I guess the two things is that my experience of that, of avoiding the trap of identity, and just real quick, I'll give another example. I owned my own business for 10 years. And when that business ended, the collapse of that identity of a business owner to an employee is shattering. That's really difficult to crawl out of that rubble, and people can do really self-harming things out of despair from that, right? The idea that I am owning a business and now I am working for someone else as a sort of verb. Someone told me once, and I don't know if this is all the way true, but the idea was that in some parts of Japanese culture, there's a way of referring to what you're doing as I am playing with X. I am playing with being a stockbroker. I am playing with being a bodybuilder. I am, right? So it's sort of a way of sort of within it harnessing that energy we had as kids, where you're like, I'm playing being a cowboy. Like that's a really liberated, fun place to be, right? For me, it just feels much more like fluid and healthy to experience my life in the terms of, what I'm doing. Being a sanctuary owner is something where I could wrap in a lot of ego around that. But when I think of sanctuary as an action, it feels categorically different to me. There's really nothing owned. I'm operating within it. I mean, someone's got to pay the bills, but but sanctuary is me going out and checking on how are the pigs doing? How are the goats? These two aren't getting along.
It does make it a lot more active, doesn't it? It's like you're intentionally choosing this thing every day as opposed to this passive thing that you call yourself for a year or whatever it is. So it's kind of interesting to think about that, because I always say I'm vegan. I never really think about it as a practice, but like you said, every time I sit down to eat, every time I decide what to bring to someone else's house, I actually decided that our music event, I co-direct a music festival, Accordion Fest, because we're total nerds.
Oh, fantastic.
We have a multi-day thing that happens every year. And the closing party is a big jam with all the visiting artists and food and a cash bar. Now, no one knows that the food every year is 100% vegan because
Yay.
I'm planning it. So of course it's going to be vegan, right? And so, that comes up in discussions and it's a whole thing, but it does make it feel like it's a proactive choice that I'm making on a regular basis, not just, oh yeah, I'm vegan, end of story.
Yeah, and then look how it works in other domains of life. I am young. I am attractive. Like all of these things are characteristics. You'll see instruments on the wall behind me. I spent most of my life as a musician. Since we started the sanctuary, I've played music maybe twice.
Oh, wow.
So as an identity of a musician, that's awful. But as someone who plays music, it's just, well, playing music's something I'm not doing right now. For me, and maybe it's not like this for everyone, it sort of relieves this sort of burden of unpacking another layer to it. It's just sometimes I play music, sometimes I don't. Right now is one of the places where I'm kind of not. Later, I probably will. It's just the verb of playing is more important than the adjective of being a musician, no matter how much I've really invested in that over the years and so forth. So, yeah. So I think to me, it can take care of some of the heaviness, but your commitment to veganism and to fitness are things that they're not floppy, right? I mean, you're going in there every day and doing it.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So let's go back to the sanctuary itself. I got 2 questions for you. First of all, the name. You must be a Lord of the Rings fan. What's the deal?
Guilty as charged. Ever since I was a sprig, I was just such a nerdy Tolkien guy. And sure, everyone reads Lord of the Rings, but how many people read the Silmarillion? And then how many people read it 3 times? And that's my level
I see where
of
this is
nerddom.
going.
Yeah, it's pretty insufferable. Yeah. In fact, I told my kids that the inscription I want on my gravestone is that dude knew a lot of stuff about Middle Earth.
Claim to fame.
And I'm fully aware how thoroughly cringy and embarrassing that is, but it is what it is.
You're owning it. This is the thing that makes it non-cringy, is that you're owning it. It's your thing. It's your jam. You're the one who's putting all your energy into this sanctuary. You can call it whatever you want. And also, by the way, I like that your support levels, like for donations, are all based on, like the Hobbit support level, the Wizard support level.
Right.
Excellent.
Yeah, and then the naming is always fun. So the chickens have sort of Hobbit names, and we have a goat named Galadriel.
Awesome.
The roosters are Morgoth and Sauron. Yeah, so that's quite fun. But the whole idea that when we kind of stumbled on that, because my wife is much more rational than me and not a Lord of the Rings freak, so she didn't know the lore quite as deeply as I did. But when we talked about Rivendell as this refuge where you go and it's a place where you read and you don't have to worry about the terrors outside in the world. There's a quote in Lord of the Rings about, or it might have been The Hobbit, evil things did not enter that valley. Mm-hmm. That was an image we kind of carried with us.
That's beautiful.
Yeah. So, yeah, I think it works. And it's something that it makes an association for someone who knows of Lord of the Rings. It's just sort of a mind hook. It kind of makes it memorable.
That's a great point.
Yeah. And it also affects our font selection and things like that. So it's, when you have a concept, it sort of frames a lot of other things. And
for sure.
Yeah, it's helpful that way.
Oh, that's so cool. Yeah. Where do you see the role of sanctuaries, whether yours or sanctuaries in general, in promoting compassion toward animals? So, I mean, there's community building options, there's education options. Where do you see that come in with your sanctuary?
So, not to lean too heavily into the sort of fitness corollary, but, a gym is a place designed for the potential for exercise and building your physical body. And to me, a sanctuary is a place selected for the potential to express compassion. So it's sort of organized around that. It's a place where we want to make it as easy as possible for you to express a connection to an animal. And just to have that experience that we all have had with our dogs and cats. Like everyone who's had a dog and cat knows, totally unique individuals. Mr. Socks and, Annie, the cat, are totally different from each other. They like different food. They have a different schedule. They just behave differently, different levels of affection. And just to see that in real life with these farmed animals, that they are 100% that way. I mean, what a sobering idea that every strip of bacon anyone has ever eaten came from a pig that was a completely unique individual. Mm-hmm. I mean, it all looks the same, but one of them was shy and one of them was outgoing and one of them didn't like cabbage. And, they just all are completely different. So, and then, we really like the opportunity to have long-term stays here. So we've had some people that have been here for like 3 weeks or a month and a half. That's different than having a wide variety of volunteers. But what it is an opportunity for someone to experience that depth of connection, mm-hmm. where they really enter into a relationship with the animal. And I think that changes people, just like when my family comes here for dinners and stuff sometimes too. And they're not particularly aligned with this. They're supportive in their way, but they don't really understand it. It's a pretty wacky thing to do for many people. But you'll just be out in the yard talking, and Bilbo the pig comes up and he looks at you and he's wagging his tail, and it's like, how can you not be kind of moved by that? There's the role of exposing with clarity what's actually happening to these animals in, factory farming and the way they're treated. I've heard some describe change as like one way is to push you into change and the other way is to pull you into change, right? Mm-hmm. I think that perspective is pushing you towards change. This approach is pulling you towards change. Like when you open your heart to, they really are just like dogs. They want to lie in the sun. They want to have community. Mm-hmm. They like you to spend time with them that's not hurried. They love snacks. I mean, they're so much, they're so much like us. And there's been some really moving occurrences with people that I've known for most of my life that are just like, I keep watching your videos and I decided I'm not going to eat pork anymore. And that's such a lovely thing to hear. That just feels like such a pure and beautiful sort of growth.
That's fantastic. Yeah. So it really is like relationship building, by just being in their presence. And I like this idea of having folks on a longer term basis. I mean, I'm sure it still happens for someone who visits for a day or for 2 hours, but to your point of having someone there for, 4 to 6 weeks or something, I'm sure that there's a whole depth of relationship that can be built there that you wouldn't get in just an hour.
Yeah, our current volunteer referred to Bilbo the pig as, he's my sun, moon, and stars.
Aww.
It was
That's
very
so sweet. I love that.
Isn't that the best? Yeah. We tried to set it up to optimize for those experiences. So last summer, we built these different zones with fences so that mm-hmm. instead of going and seeing an animal in their pen, and you're entering into their space or you're just petting them over the fence or something like that, we have this big common area and there's benches and you hang out and there's going to be pigs, goats, sheep, ducks, dogs, all hanging out, coming up to you, checking you out. If they want to get closer, they can. If they don't, they don't. And you become part of their environment. And I feel like that experience has done a lot to really get people to see them in a different way. It's not like me, a human, I'm free. You, a pig, are in a little pen separated from me. Instead, it's like we're all kind of together. Now, of course, we have to be responsible, and the animals we let out when there's people here are the ones that we know are going to be okay. And we have to tell them mm-hmm. like, hey, don't put your hand right in front of the pig's snout. They might think it's food. There's a little bit of sort of training there, but gosh, it really, it can be a really moving experience for people. And we really like the idea of having events that aren't animal specific. Because, this is one of the, I think somewhat valid complaints about sanctuary is it's a little bit of preaching to the choir sometimes. Mm-hmm. So many sanctuaries just get people that are vegans and committed to it. And that is still very purposeful. I've put it before where veganism is the how and sanctuary is the why. And for vegans to connect to the why is really helpful for them. And it's just a lovely experience. And it just reinforces that your sense of the ethics of why you do this is just completely laid out in front of you. It's just so, the idea that, well, pigs are sentient and they're really smart. But when there's a pig in front of you and just being their lovely selves, it has a different level of intensity and so forth. But we really like the idea of people coming here for things that aren't specifically for, that's something vegans would be attracted to. We do have these like dinner events called Friends Table where my wife and I cook 5 courses, and they're really fun. We do like games around the table and so forth for people, and they're such a good time. But that is largely, vegans that come, some that aren't, but mostly that are. But then, these meditation retreats we do, and we're really interested in doing like ecstatic dance. Mm-hmm. We've had this pumpkin drive that we were a part of. So a bunch of Girl Scouts, a whole Girl Scout troop brought a whole bunch of pumpkins and came here and then smashed them up and gave them to the animals and stuff. And,
so fun.
Yeah, it was great. It was so great. It was so moving how connected they were to all the animals and what a great time they had. And you know how it is as a vegan, you don't know where the seed's going to be planted, right? So It's just going to be this little thing. Someone hands you a rooster and you hold it, and that becomes a core memory. Mm-hmm. And it's something that later you can draw from when you're making changes in your life,
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I mentioned my speaker cohort earlier. I had the opportunity to do a TEDx talk, but I'm not 100% sold on the TEDx ecosystem for various reasons. It's kind of performative. It's very lowest common denominator, for lack of a better term. Anyway, it was a great opportunity, though, to speak to 1,000 people I'd never be in front of otherwise about veganism. So of course I did it for veganism. And because of exactly what you just said, you never know what someone is going to connect with. Presumably those 1,000 people connect with the format of TEDx because they bought tickets to be there. Mm-hmm. So now they're hearing a talk about veganism. Vast majority of those people weren't vegan. So using myself as a proxy for the audience's journey, going through like, I'm 11 and I went vegetarian because of my pet hamster, and how I thought, hey, he's not that different from the chicken I'm about to eat for dinner. Now I'm 16. Now I'm vegan. Now I learn about this, So I'm going through my whole journey, not knowing how this is going to land for people. But I had some really interesting conversations afterwards. Someone said, oh, I've never connected my dog to livestock before. To us vegans, is that not obvious? It isn't to non-vegans, or at least some of them. So to your point, you never know how you're going to connect or how someone else is going to connect with veganism, compassion, animals. You just got to do our little chunk in the vegan space, and people come into it, they're affected. And also, who knows how long it's going to take? It took 10 years of me being with my husband for him to decide on his own to go vegan. So you never know. There's different time frames, right?
Yeah.
But it happens, and I think it's important.
Yeah, it feels a little bit like kind of ripples. Mm-hmm. You throw a rock in the water, and
exactly.
You don't really know what's going to happen with it, and good for you with your husband, because a lot of people are like, well, I would never want to be with someone that wasn't also vegan, but just think how advantageous it is.
That's it.
If you are with someone that isn't, because you're gonna pull them in that direction. They're gonna end up eating less meat. It's a net gain. Yeah.
Agreed. And note how I said how he decided on his own. I think that's an important piece too.
I'm sure you had nothing at all to do with it.
Not at all. No. So Paul, tell us, our listeners and me, how folks can support Rivendell. So you rely on sponsorships, you've got volunteers, donations. What are the opportunities? We're going to link to your website, of course, but can you just give us a quick rundown?
Great. Yeah. Probably the single most helpful thing is to sponsor an animal and do a monthly amount. That's just great. Because the cost pressures are food, and we build them nice shelters. We get rain. It gets really hot here. We have to really provide for their comfort. And then medical care is some of these animals you can't take to the vet. You would be amazed how few vets. This is California. I mean, people think of California as a sort of vacation destination, or Los Angeles and San Diego, but it's a hugely rural state as well. All up the center is just agricultural. And despite that, there are so few vets that take care of farmed animals. And when they do, they're often from a livestock perspective. So in which case it's like, well, what do you do for a pig that's more than 6 months old? Because, they're
Right.
just, that's the end of their shelf life. So anyhow, so the vet care is quite expensive. So when you sponsor an animal, we'll like every quarter, we'll send you like an update with some pictures about how they're doing. So you kind of become part of their journey. So, and as you had mentioned, that's sort of based on Lord of the Rings. So Hobbit level is $10 a month. Elf level is $25. Wizard is $100. Wizard level helps us so much. It takes so much pressure off about, hey, you're just buying it all the time. And it's just enormously helpful when people take that step. But otherwise, just a one-off donation is great. Our Amazon wish list for things we need. Some people prefer to just give you something that you need instead of a cash donation. And that's super helpful. Sometimes it's really, when I talk about sanctuaries being a place where it's sort of a field for the potential for compassion, there's so many examples of people just like you show up and someone left you something. So someone left its blanket, we show up and there's salt blocks for the goats and things like that. And it's
amazing.
It's so lovely when people do that kind of thing, and sometimes completely anonymous. We don't know who it came from. Just someone decided, yeah, we're going to give them that, which is there's such a purity to that, But apart from that, there's these events. So people in Southern California, Friends Table is really fun. In all humility, the food is just banging.
I believe it.
We do like beta test of so we just had taco night, and we made cauliflower tacos and tofu tacos with this chipotle crema kind of sauce. We did our own beans and rice that we slow cooked. We made our own tortillas from scratch. We grow tons of passion fruit here. So we made passion fruit margaritas. Oh my
goodness.
It was awesome. So this next one we're having on April 11th, the theme is vegan Panda Express.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, but it's going to be sort of upscale, but it's going to be that kind of a thing because, a lot of us are really disappointed that Panda Express has, walked away from the few options that we had over there. So that's a great way to support us too. That's also really fun. We're having these new meditation events starting in May. That's an hour and a half of meditating with the animals and doing walking meditation with them. It's sort of oriented towards people that have that interest and also are interested in mindfulness, and very much open to beginners. And then volunteering is the other thing. So anyone in Southern California that wants to help out, sometimes some of it's physical, but there's some people like retirees and stuff where we'd like you to take a book, hang out with the chickens and read to them, because part of our mission is that having stimulative activities for them, and also the animals developing connections to people, just more and more feeling safe around people. The more people you can have be around them, you know how the research is. I mean, when you spend time with animals, I feel so incredibly fortunate. When I leave the door, I pet 2 dogs, a couple pigs, a goat. They're just coming up to me, and just the dopamine, just the positive chemicals going on just every day over and over. It's really delightful. And we want that experience to be there for other people as well. But then, people that know how to, operate a saw and a drill, we're always building stuff. Fences always have to be repaired. Like I mentioned, we're getting rain today. That just means there's so much to do. Sandbags, and there's so much to do.
I can't even imagine. You guys are powerhouses. It's so impressive. Well, Paul, it was fantastic to have a conversation with you. Thank you so much for coming on the show. We are going to link to Rivendell's website in our show notes so folks can go there and support you. And thanks again for speaking with me.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed it. Your show is great, and I really appreciate you having me on. Thanks so much, Karina.
Paul, thank you again for joining me on the show. Connect with Paul and support the Rivendell Sanctuary at our show notes, nobullshitvegan.com/222. Thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening to the No Bullshit Vegan podcast at nobullshitvegan.com.